Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fifth webinar as part of our Cost of Living campaign. I'm Laura Jameson, and I'm the Prevention Coordinator for Trading Standards Scotland. Our campaign is running throughout September and is looking to raise awareness of scams and online shopping where consumers may encounter counterfeit goods whilst looking for bargains, particularly when budgets are likely to be tighter. We're going to be talking about counterfeit toys today, and I'd like to warmly welcome our panel. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to see you both. If I could just ask you to say a little bit about yourselves. If you want to start, Darryl.
Hello everyone, my name's Darryl McKelly-White. I work for Vistalworks as Marketing Manager and UK Account Manager. Vistalworks offers an intelligence service and risk profiling tools targeting online illicit trade. We specialise in areas where there's a high risk of illicit trade and a high risk of harm. And when we're talking about illicit trade, we're talking about counterfeit goods, we're talking about unsafe items and goods that are for sale in a jurisdiction where they're not supposed to be.
Thank you, Darryl. Miles, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Will do. Yes, thanks, Laura. So I'm Miles Rees. I work at the Intellectual Property Office. We're based in Newport in South Wales. We cover the whole of the UK. And one of our primary roles is registering rights. So you will have seen trademarks and patents and designs all around you on household goods and things. But we also do a lot of work on enforcement. And I work in the enforcement policy team. So with my colleagues doing all sorts of different work around enforcement, supporting businesses and consumers and trying to protect them from the risks that counterfeit goods and also piracy, illicit streaming, all that sort of stuff is an area that we focus on. So thanks very much for inviting me.
No, you're very welcome, and thank you so much, Miles and Darryl, for joining us today. So we'll get started then. I mean, I think a lot of people are probably going to be starting to think ahead already towards the festive period. Certainly myself, I've seen a lot of stores already getting their Christmas merchandise on the shelves, and I'm also seeing a lot more adverts for the must-have toys. And these often, as you're aware, they sell out very, very quickly. Of course, that does bring an opportunity for criminals to look into how they can produce counterfeits of these must-have items. And I think just really to start, I suppose, if we can set the scene, Miles, if I could ask you first, if you could just give a wee overview of, the dangers, I suppose, of buying counterfeit toys.
Absolutely. I mean, we do work surveying people and do lots of sort of research because, people's motivations and people's reasons they buy them are quite complex, and also the risks that they sort of put themselves, the risks they're taking, and they are quite complicated, and sometimes they're not really that obvious, the risks. So, our evidence suggests, not surprisingly, people buy because of price. And we all do it, we're all online and we're saying, I want this new phone. Let's see what the cheapest deal is, the best deal. And you find one that looks a bargain and, you can't resist it. Absolutely you can't resist it. We all love a bargain. And even if it's just a little bit off, we all want a deal. So I think cheaper price is one of the most popular things. People often say that the counterfeits look the same and there's not a lot of difference in the quality. And people also say they're actually really easy to purchase is one of their motivations. But what people forget is that when you, especially online, in the old days, back in the 70s when I was buying toys and I had my pocket money, we'd go into the toy shop, argue, choose about 5 things we couldn't have because they were too expensive, and eventually you'd get the toy you could persuade mum and dad to pay for. Whereas now everything's online, and what people forget is that when you're buying online, you're giving up a huge amount of personal information. You're sharing stuff that you would never tell people, in a conversation or to someone you have no idea who they are. And I don't just mean your name and address, which is the starting point, but your email. And then you start getting into bank accounts and credit card numbers and even the little 3-digit thing on the back, the security thing. So I think the personal information is probably number one from our perspective, is the thing that makes us nervous because it's not seen. It's one of these things that you give up and you just don't know what's going to happen to it and where it might end up. So I would say that's probably top of the list, I would say.
Thanks for that, Miles. Actually, I think that's a really good point as well, because it's something that certainly when I'm shopping online, I don't even consider that. I'm like, I want to buy this at the moment. You know, I'm looking for an outfit for my cousin's wedding, so I'm like, right, I want to buy this, information in, and it's just almost autopilot. And you're right. So thank you for drawing that out. And also, that was actually quite lovely. What you said about going to the toy store, because I remember doing that when I was younger, and it was always such a real treat. And you could see everything, and you could pick the packaging up and see what was included, and it was quite lovely. So no, that was a lovely wee memory you brought back for me there as well, Miles. So thank you.
But it probably wasn't in the 70s, unlike me, you see.
Just a wee bit later, 80s, 80s baby. Daryl, if I can ask you the same question, please.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that Miles was talking about there, and it really brought me back to some of kind of where Vistalworks started, and some of the questions we were really asking at the beginning was, we're in focus groups talking to people, and they were like, oh, but what's the problem? What's the harm in that bargain? And I think the problem is that they don't realize that, yes, it's a bargain, but there is a large amount of harm attached to that. We're seeing all these counterfeit goods online that aren't tested. They're not meeting any of the regulations that are required by the legitimate manufacturers, and it's causing huge problems. Children are swallowing things that they're not supposed to, that are dangerous. I know that magnets have been all over the news the past year, and it really is like, when you stop and think, and I think particularly when you're talking to parents and say, okay, but this is what the actual harm is when it comes to that bargain that you're buying. So I really just kind of wanted to piggyback off of what Miles had said there, because I think that really resonated with us, and it's something that we are seeing all the time. It's that you've really got to think about what the implications of that are.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. The dangers attached with it, and what that could mean. You know, if something does go wrong, and that's frightening. It's really, really quite scary. I suppose just building on that, what might consumers not be aware of when it comes to counterfeit toys? And have you seen any notable examples of dangerous products that have been sold online? Daryl, if I can come to you first, please.
I think one of the ones that we see quite often, and we did quite a lot of work on, was slime. Now, slime has chemicals in it, and those chemicals are regulated. So when we're seeing counterfeit versions, homemade versions of this slime, it's unlikely that the seller is following these regulations, and it's unlikely that it's being tested. So I think that's a really clear one. Like the slime craze, it appears every single year. There's hundreds upon hundreds of listings for it online marketplaces. So I'd say that for us, slime, things like soft toys as well, that the eyes haven't been attached properly, which means obviously soft toys are supposed to be suitable from birth, but if they're not attached properly, that's a huge choking hazard for babies and younger children. And even things like Lego, that waking up on Christmas morning, child's very excited to open their Lego toy, they start trying to build and it doesn't fit together properly because it's not a legitimate product, which ends up in tears. Which you don't want on Christmas Day.
And that's a really good point as well, actually, Daryl, just drawing out that, you know, the product doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And like you say, that leads to disappointment, especially if it's something they're really excited about and you think, great, I've got hands on this. And it basically doesn't say what it's going to do. And that's really, really quite sad.
It's sad. Oh, sorry.
Come on, you go, Daryl. No.
It's sad for the child and for the parent, because I think there's so much pressure these days for parents, and particularly this year when cost of living so high, money so strapped, that parents want to make sure that they're getting, if they can, that they can get what their children's asking for. And if you think you've done the right thing and then realize you've not, it's sad and it's scary.
You know, that's very, very true. And like you say, with budgets being so much tighter, and maybe it is whittling down to just a few products, and you want to make sure it's, you know, what the little ones have asked for. And That's that's a really good point as well. Miles, what about you? What about from your side? Have you been seeing anything really coming out of this?
I mean, what I would say to viewers, listeners, is don't be fooled into thinking that it's only the big brands, the famous stuff, the stuff that's, we all see these lists, the top 10 top toys. They come out every year and there's conversations around that. Counterfeiters copy anything where they can make money. They're not fussy about it being in the top 10 or it being a well-known Scandinavian building block, like a Lego, figurines, doesn't Star Wars. They're in it to make money. So the opportunities, and they don't care about the quality of the product or the implications, or, all they care about is making money. So to make money, they're cutting corners and they're doing things as cheaply as possible. So, we see a huge range of things. We work closely with Border Force, who are seeing things, coming into the country in parcels and occasionally in containers and things. So there's a huge range of different things. But, I would say almost any toys, if you're buying toys, just be mindful that there are counterfeits. I say this to people when we talk to them about awareness. We've had counterfeit washing powder. If you're going to copy washing powder, toys are pretty easy to manufacture, you to copy. So if people will produce, car parts, all sorts of very sophisticated things, toys are easy game. And I think you just got to have your wits about you when you're buying, especially at Christmas, where we all get a bit hype and then there's a shortage of things and you suddenly find that one. One of my colleagues was telling me, a guy who works with me, he got a Buzz Lightyear for his lad, and he said, they were short of them, and he saw one online, and the guy said, this is a used one, but it's in great condition, so he bought it. It was only when he got home that Buzz speaks in Spanish, which was a little bit disappointing. Now, his child was quite young, and he said, oh, it's a special limited edition, and I think he got away with it. But, why risk that disappointment? Just try and buy carefully and sensibly, but don't make assumptions just because a product is fairly low key. Because really, there's a risk of counterfeits in almost any product.
That's a really important point, Miles, that anything can be counterfeited, and for people to bear that in mind when they are looking online, when they are doing their online shopping, to take their time. And that's what you're saying about Buzz Lightyear as well. And if the little one had been a bit older, that's when it sort of becomes, well, I don't really, I don't, this isn't what my friends got. And that's the thing as well, isn't it? Because it's if their little buddies have got similar toys, and again, just that all ties into that as well. And I think just moving on quite nicely from there, actually, because budgets are likely to be a bit tighter for a lot of people this year, what should consumers look for when buying toys online? How can they recognise quality toys, and how can they avoid potentially dangerous counterfeit toys? And Daryl, if I could ask you to come in that first, please.
Absolutely. I think at the top of the list, it's to make sure that you're buying from known, trusted brands. If you've not heard of, especially on online marketplaces, if you've not heard of the company, or if looks like it's from an individual seller, you are better to go directly to the brand, because at least you've got the trust there. I think there's quite a lot of assumptions around online marketplaces, that if you're buying from particularly Amazon, if you're buying from Amazon, people automatically assume that, okay, well, Amazon, the buck stops with Amazon, but it really doesn't. And when it comes to third-party sellers, it is their responsibility to make sure that they're selling that they're following guidelines. So I think it's making sure that you are aware that who you're buying from might not be a legitimate brand. Other things to look for is make sure they're not using somebody else's image. If you're looking at the image of the product and it's clearly got someone else's branding on it, they're not showing you their version of the product. So that's a big red flag. Also, just making sure that all of the information you would expect to be there is there. They're not trying to get away with selling you an empty box. We see that a lot. You could go down into the tiny small print and it says item not included, box only, things like that. And It's obviously hard depending on where you're buying from. The information might be limited, but if it is limited, consider why is it limited. And also things like if it's an item that you can't find anywhere, but this unknown to you seller is offering a large quantity of them, consider why they have so much stock when nobody else does, especially if it's the original brand can't offer you any.
I think that's a really interesting point too about third-party sellers on the likes of Amazon. And again, it's taking just that extra couple of minutes to know and understand what you are getting. I've certainly been online on Amazon in the past couple of weeks. I'm looking for something it's an older product from a children's television series. And because it is what they would deem out of date now, it's really hard to come across any of the products associated with it. And I thought I'd found a book. And it wasn't until I actually went into more detail, because I was like ready to buy, and then read down a bit more and it said no third-party seller, the fact that it was a used condition and it wasn't in great condition either. And I thought, thank goodness that I just took that wee bit more time just to have a look at it. But no, I think those tips are really, really helpful. Thank you. Miles, is there anything you'd like to add to that as well in terms of tips for consumers?
I would echo everything Darryl said. I mean, that's absolutely, there's sort of two routes that I always think. If you're just looking at a website you don't know, really scrutinize the website, the name of the website, misspellings. You can find a lot if you carefully look. Would you in the high street walk into a shop that had no signage, nothing you've ever recognized, and hand over notes or a credit card? You wouldn't. And it's the same with a website. Think about the platform, think about the listings, the photographs, the misspellings, all those sorts of things. If you're on one of the big platforms, an eBay or an Amazon, have a look at the seller information. It's all available. You can have a look. You need to appreciate often it's not Amazon. They're just basically a sort of warehouse that is providing a service for sellers. And sometimes they'll do it all, and sometimes they just sort of list them. But you can find out who the seller is. Are they UK based? When they've got a little, a UK flag, a Union Jack on the advert, are they really, or are they actually based overseas? Are they based in Eastern Europe or in China or somewhere? Just a little bit of digging helps. The other thing I would say is, please don't believe everything you see on social media. Don't follow links, and don't just believe recommendations that have come via the various social media. Even if it's a good friend, people pass on things with the best intentions. They know that you want that particular product or that particular opportunity, and they pass it on thinking they're doing you a favor. And often mistakes can be made in doing that. So I really think about the platform. And the other thing I would say, the sort of final thing, is a tip that we often say to people is, if you've got family who are experts on the internet, and frankly, I have to get the kids to help us fix the phone or to do things because, I'm not the best. Get some advice. Don't just make assumptions and start clicking. Just obviously with toys, you can't ask the people who are going to receive it, but there are usually people of an age that can say, oh, hang on a minute, I don't like the look of this one. That's not one I've heard of. And I know, it is quite easy, as you say, to chase the hard to find product, but you just got to be, I'm sort of slightly suspicious always when I see things online. We've got a warehouse, a storage facility full of counterfeits. And when I walk up and down those aisles and I look and I think, blimey, there's not much we haven't got. So when you're buying almost anything, I really am quite careful because it's so frustrating. I've bought counterfeits. I know I have. I bought things that I've had to send back, clothing, all sorts of things. And I've managed to get money back. But it's very, very easy to fall into it. So get some advice, get some help from people who are good at this, but just be cautious and please don't believe everything on a linked recommendation, no matter who it's come from, no matter how well intentioned that person might be.
having that conversation with family members, with friends, because it may be that you've said to them, oh, I've tried to get this product, I can't get it anywhere. And then they take on the mantle of, right, I'm going to find it. And then it's making sure that they're aware of what the pitfalls are as well, and how they can avoid that. So I think that's really pertinent. And asking for help and support and say, do you think this looks okay? I'm not sure about it. And have that, utilize your instinct feeling of, there's something about this that just doesn't feel right. And I thought that point, Daryl, you made as well, about if there's someone who's got lots of something that's sold out elsewhere, really do question, well, why is that? Why is that the case? I think these are all really helpful tips. And what I think we'll do as well is we'll make sure that we can have like almost a wee ready reckoner of things that people can keep in mind, and because I think, this transfers over toys, really any online shopping, because it is so easy to get caught up in thinking, oh, that's brilliant, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And it's not until you start to scroll, that's the part that always gets me. I always have to remind myself, read down, scroll down, and be informed as much as you can be, I suppose.
Absolutely. One other thing I would add is also, if you can, have a look on the high street, because sometimes the prices are not that different, and you can go into a toy shop, you can sort of see what the options are. Okay, very occasionally counterfeit goods can enter legitimate shops, but it's pretty rare, because they are very careful about what are known as their supply chains. So why not at least try the high street to see if your local toy store, apart from the fact they're probably employing people locally, they're paying rates and taxes and supporting communities where you live, they can give you a bit of advice. And okay, if the price is a bit high, you might reconsider, but at least having seen the toy in the shop, you know what to look for when you're searching online. So you've got that, I know it's not everyone's got the time to go searching for toys, and especially at Christmas when it's busy and people are busy. But that's another thing that I think is a nice thing to think about if you've got the opportunity, certainly.
And Miles, piggybacking off of what you said there as well, is that if you've been and seen it in person, if you do accidentally end up buying a counterfeit version of it, you are so much more likely to pick up on that ahead of time. Because if you then receive an item that's counterfeit, you might notice what the differences are and be able to identify that a lot quicker, and before any harm or upset is caused.
Yeah,
I think it's something that people overlook now, because we've become so reliant, especially during the pandemic. Everything was online, whereas now it's nice if you are able to, if you do have the time to get out and about and go have a meander. And I think you both have summed it up so perfectly when you've said that at least then you know what you're looking for, what it looks like, what it contains, and more to the point, what it doesn't contain. So if you're seeing online that you're maybe getting extra characters or whatever, you get a sense of, well, actually the real product, this is what you should expect. That's all really helpful. Thank you so much. And I suppose just drawing on this again and building on this, do you think that there are any particular toys which are maybe likely to be counterfeited in the run up to Christmas this year? And Miles, I'll ask you first.
I mean, I would say, as I've said, that the most desirable are always the most vulnerable. So the list of the ones that get the hype and that suddenly become really popular. I must admit, I can't give you specifics. I don't have a sort of list of the sort of most likely, but I just think the principles apply. It's a mindset. You need to think about this when you're buying online. Think cautiously. I know there's often the phrase "buy cheap, buy twice." Money. I appreciate you might think you're spending a little bit more, but you're just getting that guarantee of quality by getting the original product. But yeah, the must-haves, they will all be in the papers. We know that there's a certain time when there are surveys and these are listed. And I know, I'm sure Daryl will know from the industry insight exactly what type of toys. We tend to see it a little bit late in that the stuff we're seeing will be seized by customs and take a while to come through. So I don't have a list, unfortunately.
That's no problem at all, Miles. So thank you. With what you're saying there as well, you made me think of something that my mum often says, and it's cheap is expensive. So, you know, absolutely keep that in mind when shopping, because you might save a lot. Sometimes it's not even saving a huge amount, but the impact is absolutely tremendous. Daryl, can I bring you in now, please?
Absolutely. Again, I would say that I've not seen particular trends coming through quite yet. But what we've seen on our sort of online marketplace checker tools coming through is people searching for a lot of Harry Potter themed toys, and I think that probably it coincides with anything released that is quite popular with the younger ones. Things like, speaking about Buzz Lightyear earlier, immediately made me think of the new Buzz film. Anything to do with that, I imagine will be quite popular, in any other sort of big movies or anything coming out later in the year. This is completely an assumption as well, but with the money being tighter and budgets being tighter this year, I'd imagine that I know Miles mentioned earlier that it's not just the expensive items, but the cheaper items. And I'd imagine that there may be a move to more sort of, as opposed to really high priced items, more sort of mid-level items going on. But yeah, anything that's popular at the time, anything that's big in the sort of movies and anything coming kind of through on that. Lego's always a huge one. The amount of things that we see coming through on our checker tools for Lego always exponentially rises as we move sort of into November time. So yeah, those are the sort of ones that we see very regularly coming through. Sorry.
That's fascinating, actually. And the tool it's so useful. It's so helpful. And what we'll do, Daryl, is we'll make sure that we have a wee link so viewers can access this, give it a try themselves. And I've used it before, and it's certainly been very, very helpful. And it gives you that reassurance when you are going to make a purchase. So, no, it's fantastic. Thank you. And I suppose then it's just moving on to our final question. And it's, if you could give consumers one top tip to help them buy toys safely online and avoid fakes, what would it be? And Miles, if I can ask you first, please.
I mean, I think I've probably already covered this, but it is about looking at the seller and don't just take the name. Try and find out who owns the website, who the seller information is. There's a lot of information available online. If you take the time to look, do a bit of digging, do a bit of investigating. Don't just put your credit card details in. If it says it's the last one available, it probably isn't. So just take a breath, think about it, and have a good look at the site, the information that's available, and just see if it feels right. And I think that's the best tip. My other final thing, because I could never just do one, I would ask people, please, if you do buy counterfeits, report it. Please tell us, because we need the evidence to be able to take action against these sellers. You know, these people are not just involved in selling toys. They are involved in all forms of criminality. They're not your friendly person, you know, the sort of Arthur Daly, Del Boy type characters. These are organized crime groups. And you know, so be careful what you buy, check out the seller. But if you do fall foul of this, please report it to you know, I know you provide all that information about who to report it to in Scotland, but please do that, because it makes a big difference. And obviously, you know, that's the first step to getting your money back and protecting yourself from the potential harms that goes with buying these types of goods.
Thanks, Miles. And yeah, we'll happily provide details for Advice Direct Scotland to make sure that consumers are able to report when they come across these goods. And I like that point as well, Miles, about if it says there's only one remaining, because I think we've all been there where we're looking at it and then it's like, oh, where's my card? And you're just trying to get everything organised as quickly as possible. And you're so focused on the one remaining that you're not taking that time just to look more widely. So yeah, I think that's it's a good point for all of us, and one to definitely remember. Darren, what about yourself?
I think my one piece of advice would be to remember that if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. Items are manufacturers charge items at a certain rate for a reason. So if it's being sold for a significantly lower value, especially if it's a big ticket item, think about whether it's reasonable that they're selling that item at this time at that price. And again, echoing what Miles said, because I can't just give one, I can't give one tip. More to kind of echo what Miles mentioned earlier about if you're not sure, ask. Like you can ask your friends, you can ask your family, but there's so many more resources out there. Our checker tools here to help. Trading Standards Scotland have so much information available. IPO will have so much information available. Read up, and if you're not sure, do see if you can find some help to make sure that you're making the best purchase choice and you're buying safe and legitimately.
I think that's been such an informative session, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, for watching. I hope you found it useful. I certainly have. I'd like to thank the panel as well for just being absolutely fantastic, sharing their knowledge and expertise. It's very much appreciated. But the discussion doesn't stop here. Please do get in touch with any questions you have, and we'll make sure that we get back in touch with you. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and sign up to our weekly Scam Share Bulletin to keep up to date on the latest scams and how to avoid them. For more information on the campaign itself, visit www.tsscot.co.uk. And finally, thanks again to our panel and to everyone who's joined us. I hope you have a great day, everybody.